Welcome to the debate. Um, Imagine you are the Chief Information Security Officer of a major metropolitan hospital, and at 2 a.m., your pager goes off,
Ouch. Yeah, that's never a good sign.
right? It's the worst case scenario. A severe cyber attack is just spreading through your network, and you are suddenly faced with this excruciating choice. Do you pull the entire hospital network offline to protect the integrity of the medical records, ensuring the data isn't corrupted or encrypted by the attackers?
Uh-huh.
Or do you keep the network running because the emergency room doctors need the availability of those patient files like right now to save lives? You are forced in real time to weigh integrity against availability.
And that impossible choice is exactly why we are here today. It perfectly illustrates the absolute core of information security.
Exactly. That scenario brings us straight to the center of our discussion today, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability triad, the CIA triad.
The big one.
The big one, yes. This is the foundational conceptual framework in cybersecurity. It's the absolute cornerstone of the CISSP curriculum, specifically Domain 1, which governs security and risk management. And today, we are analyzing this through the lens of core cybersecurity texts, NIST guidelines, and, analytical frameworks like the DOD Triad and the Parkarian Hexad.
Right.
And my stance on this is that the CIA Triad acts as a cohesive, unified governance lens. It is the ultimate objective that harmonizes business strategy, allowing security professionals to align their controls perfectly with the overarching mission of the organization.
Well, and I argue that the triad is defined entirely by its natural, unavoidable frictions. It is not a harmonious model at all. It is fundamentally a system of zero-sum trade-offs. Maximizing one element of the triad inherently degrades another. You just cannot optimize confidentiality, integrity, and availability simultaneously without breaking the system.
So to begin, I view the CIA triad as the ultimate unified objective of every control, policy, and system that an organization deploys. It's not just a technical baseline, right? It forces what we call a manager mindset.
Yeah, which is tough for a lot of people.
It is, because most people coming into security, they focus on the technical implementation. They want to talk about firewalls, access control lists, or the mechanics of AAA services.
Right, the whole identification, authentication, authorization, and accounting.
Exactly. But let's look at how AAA actually works beneath the governance layer. AAA represents the mechanical gears of the system. Identification is claiming who you are. Authentication is mathematically proving it, usually via a password or a token.
Sure.
Authorization is the system checking the permissions list to see what you're allowed to do. And accounting is logging that action. Those are the mechanical gears, but the CIA triad is the steering wheel. It provides the essential vocabulary required to classify assets, prioritize risk, and, justify security budgets to the boardroom. When you protect an organization, all three CIA pillars must work in concert as interlocked components of a single governance strategy.
See, I come at it from a different way. The CIA triad is not a harmonious checklist where you just, tick the boxes, steer the car, and achieve perfect security. It is a model of necessary, unavoidable security tensions. If you enhance one leg, you almost always degrade another. I think a better analogy than a steering wheel is tuning a high-performance engine.
Okay. How so?
Well, if you want to maximize the speed of the car, which, we can equate to availability, getting the data there as fast and as often as possible, you might adjust the air-to-fuel ratio to run rich. You pump more fuel into the engine, but by doing that, you radically increase the heat and the stress on the engine block, which risks catastrophic failure. You are literally degrading the integrity of the engine to serve availability.
But just the source material is very clear on these natural frictions. Take aggressive encryption for confidentiality. By locking data down with complex cryptographic keys, you inherently restrict ease of use. You add operational friction that degrades availability. Or conversely, if you want to maximize availability, you create multiple data replicas across geographic cloud zones so the data is always accessible.
Which is a standard, highly recommended resilience practice.
It is. But by doing that, You've just multiplied your attack surface. You now have data sitting in 3 different physical locations, which severely threatens confidentiality and integrity. The job of a security leader is not to blindly maximize all 3 pillars. That's a fool's errand. True governance is deliberately choosing the right imbalance based on the specific business mission.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. This concept of the manager mindset and asset classification actually proves the unifying power of the triad, rather than proving it's unbalanced. I mean, prioritization does not mean sacrifice.
Better know about that.
No, hear me out. The triad allows a manager to map business objectives directly to security controls. If you're dealing with financial transaction records, the triad steers you to prioritize integrity controls above all else. The data must be accurate, but you still maintain confidentiality and availability. If you're running that emergency dispatch system from my opening scenario, the triad aligns your strategy toward availability controls. The CIA triad is what elevates security from those technical mechanics of AAA up to a unified business strategy.
But wait, that very prioritization process you just described, that proves my point. It proves the triad is about making sacrifices. Let's look at a public-facing website.
Okay.
As a manager, you must actively choose to prioritize availability, like the site must load quickly for customers, and integrity, meaning the content cannot be defaced by an attacker. But to achieve that, you completely deprioritize confidentiality because the data is inherently meant to be public. It's an exercise in identifying what you can afford to lose. You are intentionally unbalancing the triad to serve the business. It's a zero-sum game.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. When you prioritize availability on a public web server, you aren't abandoning confidentiality. You are shifting where it is applied. We use compensating controls.
Well, sure, you protect the back end.
Exactly. Yes, the front-end marketing copy is public, so confidentiality isn't applied there. But you implement strict compensating controls on the back-end database to maintain the confidentiality of the user's session data and the administrative credentials. The triad works as a unified whole across the architecture. And furthermore, I think your engine analogy assumes technical controls are always inherently at odds, but cryptography shows us that technical implementations can actually serve multiple pillars simultaneously without causing that operational friction.
I'm skeptical. Give me an example of that.
Think about digital signatures. Let's break down how a digital signature actually works mechanically. It combines 2 different cryptographic processes. First, it uses hashing. Hashing takes any amount of data and runs it through an algorithm to produce a fixed-size string of characters. If even 1 comma is changed in a 1,000-page document, the resulting hash is completely different. So hashing gives you an absolute mathematical guarantee of integrity.
Agreed. Hashing covers integrity beautifully.
But a digital signature doesn't stop there. It then takes that hash and encrypts it using the sender's private key, which is asymmetric encryption. Because only the sender has that private key, anyone can use the sender's public key to decrypt the hash. This mathematically proves the authenticity of the sender and protects the confidentiality of the validation process. You are serving multiple master objectives, integrity, confidentiality, and authenticity, with a single, elegant mathematical operation. The technology doesn't have to be an engine tearing itself apart. It can be a unifier.
That's a compelling argument regarding digital signatures in a perfectly operating environment. But have you considered what happens when the math doesn't operate in a vacuum? I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it scales to the operational reality of Domain 1 tensions.
Why not?
Let's bring this down to the reality of incident response. Let's say you have a highly sensitive system where integrity is paramount. To ensure no unauthorized changes happen, you implement strict integrity requirements. You require multi-party approvals for every single configuration change. 2 senior executives have to sign off with physical hardware tokens before a firewall rule is modified.
Which is a very strong textbook integrity control.
Yes, it is. But what happens during a severe incident? A zero-day attack is actively tearing through your network. Your incident response team needs to isolate a subnet immediately to stop the bleeding. But because of your strict integrity controls, the system will not allow the firewall change.
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right, the technical team has to wake up 2 executives at 3 a.m., get them to physically find their hardware tokens, and authenticate. You have directly, measurably slowed down system recovery operations, which severely threatens your availability. The friction isn't theoretical, it is operational. The integrity control literally strangled the availability control during a crisis.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you're looking at a localized failure rather than the holistic picture. To really understand failure, we have to look at the DAD triad, the negative opposites of CIA: disclosure, alteration, and destruction or denial.
Right, the exact inverse of the triad.
Precisely. Disclosure is a failure of confidentiality. Alteration is a failure of integrity. Destruction or denial is a failure of availability. And I think the DAD triad perfectly illustrates how interconnected the CIA pillars are. Look at a modern ransomware attack. It is the ultimate manifestation of the DAD triad, and it proves you cannot separate these concepts. The attackers breach the network and exfiltrate your sensitive data. That is disclosure. Then they encrypt your local files. That is alteration, because unauthorized changes were made to the data state. Finally, they lock you out of your systems. That is denial.
Well,
Let me just finish the thought. Ransomware triggers all 3 failures simultaneously. A failure in one area naturally cascades into the others. You can't just patch one hole. The water comes in everywhere. This demands a unified, holistic defense strategy.
I look at the exact same ransomware scenario and see the opposite conclusion. According to core incident classification materials, ransomware is initially and primarily an availability incident. It is fundamentally a denial of service. Your own data is being withheld from you. Now, you brought up data exfiltration. Modern double extortion variants of ransomware absolutely add a confidentiality breach, the threat to leak the stolen data on the dark web. But that combination does not unify the defense. In fact, it rips the incident response team in half.
How does it rip them in half? They are responding to the same adversary.
Because they are forced into fighting a two-front war with directly competing priorities. Let's walk through the timeline. Part of your team is desperately trying to restore from offline backups to get the business running again. That's the availability fight. The executives are screaming to get the systems back online so the company can make money. But another part of your team, the forensic analysts, are trying to figure out exactly what data left the network. They need to know if you have to notify regulators under laws like GDPR or HIPAA, which is the confidentiality fight.
Right. Both are critical business needs.
But here is the friction. Restoring access quickly often destroys the forensic evidence needed to understand the confidentiality breach. When you rapidly wipe and restore servers from backups to achieve availability, you overwrite the RAM, you overwrite the temporary logs, and you destroy the exact artifacts the forensic team needs to see how the data was exfiltrated. The tension is excruciating. If you wait for forensics, the business bleeds money. If you restore immediately, you are blind to the data leak. The triad isn't unified in a crisis. It is pulling your resources in opposite directions.
But that's exactly why the manager mindset is so critical and why the triad is a governance tool, not just an incident response checklist. Yes, the response requires balancing resources, but the overarching governance framework, the policies, the standards, the business continuity planning, was built on the unified CIA model. Without that unified model, you wouldn't even have the vocabulary to understand the two-front war you are fighting. And we know the CIA triad is structurally sound because it serves as the absolute nucleus for every broader business framework that has come since.
You mean the extensions like the Parkerian hexads?
Yes. As the industry evolved, we saw new models emerge. If you look at the 5 pillars of information security, they take confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and they add authenticity and non-repudiation.
We should define non-repudiation for a second because it's crucial.
Oh, please do.
Non-repudiation isn't just a buzzword. It's the mathematical and legal binding of an action to an identity. Through things like digital certificates and audit trails, it ensures that a user cannot deny having performed a transaction. If an employee transfers $10 million, the cryptography and the logs mathematically prove they did it and they cannot repudiate or, deny the action.
Exactly. And the Parkerian hexad takes the CIA triad and adds possession, authenticity, and utility. My point is that these broader models don't replace the CIA triad. They orbit it. They use it as their gravitational center. The CIA triad is the foundation upon which all other business alignment, including non-repudiation and utility, is built. It's the nucleus of modern security architecture.
I strongly disagree. I think those extensions, especially Don Parker's hexad, exist specifically because they highlight the fundamental limitations of the original CIA triad. They prove that the triad alone lacks the definitional precision required for complex, real-world incident classification.
Give me an example of where the triad falls short in the real world.
Okay, let's step away from theoretical engines or whatever and look at modern cloud architecture. Imagine your engineering team creates a snapshot of a highly sensitive customer database. Due to an automated configuration error, that snapshot is accidentally moved into a publicly accessible AWS S3 bucket. Anyone on the internet can download the file. Now, fortunately, your team did their due diligence and the data inside that snapshot is heavily encrypted with KMS keys, key management service keys, that the attacker does not have. Under the pure CIA triad, how do you classify this incident?
Well, if we are strictly applying the triad, confidentiality is technically maintained because the robust encryption renders the data unreadable to unauthorized parties. They can download the file, but it's just cryptographic gibberish to them. And assuming we still have the original database, availability and integrity are also intact.
Exactly. Under the CIA triad, everything is fine. Confidentiality is mathematically intact. But any CISO will tell you, we have still suffered a massive failure. We have lost something critical. This is where the hexad steps in and introduces the concept of possession. We have lost physical and logical control, possession, of the medium, even if the confidentiality of the data inside it is preserved. The file is out there in the wild. If we only use the CIA triad, we struggle to accurately classify the scope of this cloud incident. Distinguishing between confidentiality and possession shows that the triad is not a perfect, all-encompassing unified theory. It is a foundational model, yes, but it is a model of trade-offs and blind spots that inherently requires outside concepts to accurately describe reality.
That's a highly sophisticated nuance, and the cloud scenario certainly complicates things. But I would argue that possession, in your S3 bucket example, is simply a control layer that ultimately serves the higher order objectives of the CIA triad. You care about possession because you are ultimately worried that one day the encryption might be broken and confidentiality will fail. Whether you are talking about the Parkerian hexad or the 5 pillars, you are still ultimately trying to answer the core business question. Is our data secret? Is it accurate? And is it there when we need it? The triad provides the essential vocabulary to justify those KMS encryption budgets and prioritize cloud configuration risks. Without it acting as a unified governance lens, security just devolves into a pile of disjointed technical mechanics and alert fatigue.
And I would argue that treating it as a unified, harmonious lens is actually what causes alert fatigue, because it lulls leadership into thinking they can have it all. It creates unrealistic expectations. The true power of the triad lies in illuminating the necessary trade-offs. It forces leaders to navigate the inherent uncomfortable friction between keeping data strictly locked down, keeping it mathematically altered, and keeping it highly accessible to doctors at 2 p.m. a.m. You cannot maximize all three. True security governance is the art of choosing the right imbalance for the moment.
You know, it seems we have arrived at a fascinating convergence despite our different angles. We both agree that the CIA triad is far more than a simple technical checklist. It is a critical analytical tool that requires a distinct manager mindset. Whether you view it as a cohesive whole driving business strategy or a matrix of competing tensions forcing difficult choices, you cannot properly evaluate risks, implement controls, or classify assets without it.
Absolutely. Anyone looking to master security governance, particularly for Domain 1, must understand these dynamics deeply. The mechanisms of security, from cloud storage to quantum encryption, will change every day, but the underlying philosophy of navigating these three properties is constant.
There's certainly much more nuance to explore, especially as these principles are applied to emerging architectures and increasingly sophisticated threats. But for now, we return to the hospital CISO in the middle of the night. Whether you see a singular, elegant framework guiding their hand or a high-performance engine of violent competing tensions forcing a sacrifice, well, it all depends on how closely you examine the gears. Thank you for listening to the debate.